So to start with, let's keep the lawyers employed. What we're going to be discussing here today will consist of partially some Horizon Mobile products which exist today and are currently out towards market. And it's also going to exist of some technology previews which today yet are not in schedule for external release. So take what might be shown, might or might not come out at the other end of the product development pipeline. So to start off with, I'd like to introduce Srinivas.
Hey guys, my name is Srinivas Krishnamurthy. I'm a Senior Director for Products at VMware focusing on mobile. Been with the company for about 9 years and worked on a lot of different things in the past. But for the last, I'd say 4 years or so, I've been heading up the mobile group.
And my name is Craig Newell. I'm the technical lead for the Horizon Mobile product. Started with VMware about 3.5 years ago to take the Android virtualization products from research project through to product, and have been working on the iOS for some time now. So to start off with, I think we'll just go through a little bit of a brief discussion on the motivation of why we came up with the Horizon Mobile products and where we see it going in the future. And then we'll go into do some live demos. I'll show off the current existing Horizon Mobile Android products. And then we'll go and do some quick demos and looks at what we have with the iOS equivalent. And then we'll finish off the rest of the session by breaking down at more of a technical level what we just saw in the demos. So going through the different pieces of the product, and then finally some Q&A. So over to you, SK.
Cool. Thanks, Craig. Hey guys, so I know it's Thursday afternoon. I know how many guys went to see Bon Jovi yesterday? How many guys were kind of bummed when he stopped playing? Okay. All right, so I know Thursday afternoons are rough, so I want to kind of get the crowd going a little bit before we get into the content. So one way I've found over the years to get the crowd to wake up a little bit is to have everybody say my name. I realize it's kind of a long, complicated name, so I'm going to say it once, and I want everybody to say it after me, okay? You guys in? Yep. All right. Srinivas Krishnamurthy. Say it. One more time. All right, we're good. All right, now let's just focus on mobile from now on. I know you guys are up for it. So, as I mentioned, we've been working on mobile for about 4 years, and the reason we kind of got interested in mobile, way back when, was that we started realizing that the role of a mobile phone was fundamentally changing from just being a communication device to being a computational device. So our thought process then was that, hey, what if this thing becomes the next generation PC? What role does VMware want to play in this? Do we just completely ignore it because mobile phones don't have the x86 processor? They have ARM processor, which is completely different from everything else that we have done to date. Or do we go explore and figure out what, if we should do something? And we decided to get in. We've kind of gone through a lot of different things that we've tried and some that we've kept at it, some that we've just kind of abandoned on the side. But the one use case that we're focusing on now, the one that we're talking about publicly, is the notion of, when you think about enterprises and how we use devices, traditionally a lot of us have been BlackBerry shops, right? We all bought, corporate BlackBerries. My first, smartphone at work was a corporate BlackBerry issued to me by my organization. And that's just the way it was, right? And now what we're seeing is that a lot of us are starting to buy our own personal devices, whether it be an iPhone or an Android device. And more often than not, these are more powerful, more capable. They're just more sexy than the devices that IT has traditionally given us. And so there's a strong preference for us to use our own devices, right? At work as well. And so, what we've found from talking to a lot of enterprises is that whether it's a BYOD device, whether it's my personal device that I'm bringing into work, or, even if it's a corporate issued device, how we use these devices has fundamentally changed in the last 5 years, right? So now if I look at any device that anybody in this room is carrying, no matter who gave you the device, you downloaded some personal apps, right? Let's say VMware gave me a phone, I probably will go download Facebook. I probably will go download Angry Birds, or my kid would download Angry Birds or Temple Run, whatever games that kids play these days, right? And I do the same thing on my personal phone, and it's on the same device, I also have my work applications. So the notion is that no matter who buys the device, There will be personal content on the device, and there'll be work content on the device, on the same device. Right? It's not just about work. The days where IT can say, listen, I gave you the device, and therefore I don't want you to download anything onto it. You can't do anything besides work on it. Those days are just gone, and I just don't think it's going to fly anymore to say that. And so we're kind of looking at that context saying, hey, how do we manage, how do we secure in the context of a device that serves dual purposes, my personal needs as well as my work needs, right? That's really the environment that we're looking at. And so when we look at a device, obviously it's got a whole bunch of apps and data and content on it, right? And if you start kind of peeling the onion a little bit, what you realize is that the corporate content is a small part of the device. And so what a lot of vendors who've started looking at enterprise mobility and trying to solve that problem have done is kind of taken the BlackBerry model, right? And said, look, I'm going to lock down the device, I'm going to put a device pin, and I'm going to control what you can and cannot do on that device, just like we've done with BlackBerries, right? And they said, we'll do the same thing. That's kind of the MDM-ish way of doing things, right? And so we started locking down the device, and we control it. But then if you look at it, there's no need for you to control the device anymore. There's only just a small bubble that you need to control. And if I can control that, and if I can secure that, and if I can protect that small corporate bubble, what happens on the rest of the device, I actually don't care. I actually don't want to know. There's all kinds of privacy issues, the liability issues. I actually don't even want to know, as long as I can control that corporate bubble, right? So our approach to enterprise mobility is to say, listen, instead of doing device management, let's do a workspace, which is your corporate content, which is a collection of your work applications and data. We'll provision that onto any device. We'll secure that, we'll manage that, and if you quit or get fired or whatever, we'll just wipe that corporate content off the device. The rest of the device is just left behind. Right? That's our approach to enterprise mobility, and we think it's a better way. And a lot of feedback that we've been getting from enterprises who are part of a Lighthouse customer program have been that when they've tried to do, whole device management, kind of like the BlackBerry model, in these days, employees are starting to push back and saying, look, I have a lot of other content on my device. I don't want you to know. It's just kind of creeping me out that you can actually, know what's going on my device, and I don't want to know. I don't want you to know, and I don't want you to wipe everything that's on my device. Our approach is all about just managing what we need to. In our terminology, we call that a workspace. And as I said, a workspace is a collection of your work applications and your work data, right? And so there's some key attributes of this workspace that are absolutely critical in order for us to provide a compelling solution. The first one is that corporate content needs to be secure. Right? The biggest problem that enterprises talk to us about in terms of enterprise mobility is data leakage. People are petrified of corporate content leaking from these devices. Right? And not that employees are going to do it, on purpose, but just accidentally, right? You do an open-in, and you click on Dropbox or whatever, and voila, your file is, on Dropbox or Evernote or some other cloud service, right? It's outside of IT's control. And that's what people are worried about, data leakage from these mobile devices. And so we have spent a lot of time, and Craig is going to do it'll show you a couple of the things that we have done to kind of protect data, but that's really critical. Data at rest is fully encrypted. Data in transit is, through VPNs and tunnels, secure tunnels. And we also control what apps you can use to open your attachments in. We do a lot of things to make sure that data doesn't leak out, right? So the workspace is fully secure. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out, right? What happens in that workspace stays in the workspace, right? That's how we ensure that, your data is secure. And the second thing, which is absolutely critical, every customer that I've talked to said, listen, we're getting started with mobile, and the first thing that we're going to do is emails, contacts, and calendar. That's the easy thing to do. That's kind of like the BlackBerry model. But they're all starting to realize that there's actually a good need for us to put more applications on these devices. You can actually do more than just emails on these devices, right? So a lot of the enterprises that we're talking to are starting to develop other internal apps that they'd like to mobilize, that they'd like to be able to give to their employees to actually make them more productive. And so your workspace then can't be just about emails, contacts, and calendar. You've got to be able to put other applications, interesting applications, inside that workspace. So your workspace needs to be extensible. It needs to be customizable. You should be able to put other content, other interesting content into it. And the last thing is, this is key, right? Especially given that BYOD is kind of happening today, and it is probably going to happen. It's not going away. It's not a fad. Our belief is that it's here to stay. Is how do you separate personal from corporate? How do you make sure that personal stuff doesn't get in on the corporate side? How do you ensure that corporate stuff doesn't leak out onto the personal side? how do you ensure that clear separation of your personal and corporate content is absolutely critical as well. So those are the three key pillars in terms of our notion of a workspace. And so we create that workspace, and then we want to manage the workspace, right? So we have a management interface, and unfortunately we don't have network connectivity, so we can't quite show you the management interface today. But if you guys want to stick around after the session, we can try to pull up my laptop and show you a quick demo of that. But it's not just about the workspace and the on-device component. It is what does IT have as a management interface to be able to create that workspace, to set policies on that workspace, to be able to monitor and manage it, and then if something happens, to be able to remotely wipe it, is all done through a management interface that we've created, right? And so think of that management interface as kind of like what you see with the classic MDM, right? Those are the kinds of policies that you can set, but just on the workspace, not on the whole device, right? We fundamentally believe that managing the entire device is just the wrong way to go, right? So that's really the way we've thought about it. And so with that as the context, what we're going to do now is switch and actually show you the stuff that we've built, both on Android and on iOS. And then we'll talk about some of the security things that we've put in place to ensure that, that the three pillars that we talked about are addressed in the product.
Okay, so to start off with here, and we'll just see if the AV magic works. Yep. So here I have a Samsung Galaxy Note, nice big handset to demonstrate it projects nicely. And it's just the standard Samsung phone that you get with all of the normal operator and otherwise approved software that's been put on it, plus any software that the home user decides to launch onto it. And what I can do here is I can just click on an icon, and of course my corporate security policy says must enter a password, so let's defeat the corporate security password. And I'm through to a completely separate copy of Android. So if you look here, we have a set of applications which are completely different. These are just straight unmodified Android apps that my IT administrator has selected and that are pushed down to this version of Android. The device is, completely separate from here, but yet it's also integrated in. So if we switch back to the home environment and we say, well, what's a very common use case? You get some notification comes in. So I can just pull down the notifications and say, okay, let's click on an invite here, and it will automatically do the switch over to the work. I didn't have to enter my PIN code because just like a screen lock on a normal device, there's a timeout period. And now I'm through into my calendar application for work here. And if I just hit home, you see that I return back to the work environment. So what we've done is basically created two separate environments on the one handset, which we can isolate and control and have control over. So that's pretty much the Android product that we have today.
Can I just add a couple things to that? So if you notice the UI, right? I mean, so that is another instance of Android running on the device at the same time, right? So there's two instances of Android running. And the way we've thought about it is, from a UI perspective, we said this corporate workspace that we have created, it's for corporate use. This is not a consumer thing, right? It's for corporate. So we basically try to create the most compelling work phone. That's really our vision, right? So it's like when you open the box, let's say you bought an iPhone, right? You open the box. It's got a set of applications that are pre-installed, right? It's got your weather app, it's got your stock app, it's probably got your Facebook. It's nice. It's a good starting point. And if you want to get more apps, certainly you can go to the App Store and get more apps, right? So we tried to create a similar experience for the corporate phone with a corporate user in mind, not a consumer, right? So we know 100% of the people, corporate users, will do emails, contacts, and calendar. No matter what else they do, 100% of them will do this. So we basically made the UI optimized for that. Out of the box, when I open the workspace for the first time, I'll see my email, contacts, calendar, and every single beta customer that has played with it, the feedback is, hey, this is so intuitive, I don't need to go train my people. Right? I mean, it's so obvious that is my email, contact, and calendar apps, right? And then if I want to put other apps, and it's just Android anyway. So if, for example, IT doesn't like this and they want to move it to the right, they can do that, right? I mean, all that is fully customizable, but out of the box, we want it to be a very compelling experience. And secondly, we know that people are going to do this for work, right? So we said everybody wants to be on the intranet, right? There's so much of our content is on the intranet, on our intranets. So you want to be able to have VPN access back to corporate, right? So the minute I switch from the personal to the corporate side, automatically have intranet access. So I'm already on the intranet. I can actually start browsing and all that stuff. That's seamlessly built into the product. And the other thing that we know people want to do is print onto the network printers. That we all print, right? How many people print at work? How many people print from their phones? Why not? I mean, we'd like to be able to print, right? We just it's not available today. So we've integrated the ability to print to the network printers from the work side. So the thought process is, if I'm looking at a work email, I travel a fair bit for work, right? So if I have an itinerary, whatever, I should be able to go into my emails and say, print this. And it goes and prints onto the network printer. So our vision there is to create a very, very compelling phone that's optimized for corporate users. And the good thing is, it's delivered to you in software, and it's going to run on your personal device. And from an IT standpoint, one of the things that a lot of customers that we've talked to, especially in the context of Android, is they've said, listen, Android is not one thing, right? It's fragmented. There's so many different variations. Everybody's UI looks different. Everybody's capabilities are slightly different. And from an IT standpoint, it's hard to manage that complexity, right? And some phones are upgraded by the carriers, this month, and some other carrier upgrades at some other time, right? The OEMs upgrade or don't upgrade, and it gets pretty complicated. And so what virtualization and the approach that we've taken to do is we kind of normalize that fragmentation and give you just this version of Android that you can manage. And that version of Android that we give you is going to look exactly the same on every single device. And you don't really care if the underlying operating system is upgraded by the carrier or the OEM, because you're not managing that. You get to manage this. And if you want to update this, in this demo, the personal side is running ICS and the work side is running Froyo, just to show you that you can. And if you want to upgrade the work side, we'll give you the capability to upgrade the work side from Froyo to Gingerbread or to ICS or whatever. You get to do it whenever you're ready. You can test it. You can do rollouts and say, look, I'm going to upgrade the IT group first, make sure everything is cool before I upgrade everybody else. You're in complete control of the work environment. Just hold on to the questions till the end. Thanks.
Okay, so that's our current Android solution. So if we just play magic here, let's do some cable swapping. We should be back over. Wait for the HDMI to resync. And off we go with iOS. So what we'd done on Android was we'd basically managed to use virtualization to create a completely separate work-managed environment on the same handset. So we've taken the two handsets that a lot of people carry and put them into one. Now what we have to do is the same similar user experience with iOS. Now, as we know, Apple have certain restrictions and controls on how you use the platform. And so we've had to come up with a different technical implementation to achieve the same manageability and user experience goals that we were. So here is my personal iPhone with all of the usual mixture of applications that you end up on any phone. But yet, here for organizational purposes, I've created a folder. And this folder contains a number of applications which we have wrapped. So we've taken an existing application and we've put a wrapper around the outside of it and applied policy to that application. So it's very much like, whereas in the Android solution, you can look at it and say, well, that's VMware Workstation. It's a type 2 hypervisor with a VM running. Here, we've had to take a different approach, and this is like VMware ThinApp, where we've taken the application and applied policy around the outside. So for example, if I click on the GSS application, GSS is the VMware Global Support application, you can see it comes up, and then it realizes, oh, I need to enter a PIN code policy, because that's what my IT admin has selected. So let's defeat the PIN code, and then back to running the application. And this particular application comes up and connects through to the VMware Global Support network. Now, once I've run one application, just like I could on the Android device where I went and I could switch back and forth between other applications without the PIN code reappearing, I can do the same thing here. So if I fire up the mail application here, it came straight up. It remembers that I've already entered the PIN code within the last timeout period, and therefore I'm straight through to things right in at the moment. And if I go through the particular email here, and I pick an email that has a link in it, and I'll just pick a random bit of spam that gets sent to my inbox. And what you really want to do here is we want to be able to make it so that when we click on a link on the email, we don't end up going to the system browser, but rather we want to go to our own isolated browser that we can control and route back to the corporate network. Because that's where a lot of the emails that I get anyway. Personally, you know, they've got a little bit of information and then a link to some intranet system. So if I just click on the link here, okay, instead of taking me to Safari, it will take me off to a demonstration browser here, which isn't very functional on the network. It just shows you a white screen. But this is really showing that what we've done here is we're not just applying simple policies like, you know, the PIN code across each of the applications, but rather we're also, you know, getting involved in the way that applications interact between each other, and that's what we call the workspace, all of these interacting applications. So I think with that done, I'm just going to now switch over and let's go into some details for bits and pieces. So if we want to start dissecting what we've just seen from a technical perspective, and let me get the projector across, let's go through it and work out what we're doing. So I'll start off with defining what do we mean by mobile on a technical aspect, what do we mean by a workspace, what do we mean by management, since that's part of the key pieces here, what do we mean by security? Security means many things to many people. And then I'll go in and we'll take a dive into what's the Android architecture, and then we'll finish up with a dive into the iOS architecture itself. So to start off with, what is mobile? Mobile gets applied to anything, and sometimes it's just the latest and greatest buzzword. But in this particular case, what we're looking at with Horizon Mobile is devices which are mostly connected to the network. So that means that they have to be able to operate both online, which is a common use case, but they also have to be able to operate offline. So if I have my phone today, I expect to be able to check my email when I'm out and about, but yet if I'm still sitting on the subway where I have no internet connectivity at all, I still need to be able to read my emails and reply to them, knowing that as soon as I get back into network coverage, it's going to continue on. So this sort of rules out things like VDI, which require you to be always connected. So we focus on applications which are running locally on the device. And of course that means that we are looking at devices these days, mobile phones and tablets. And of course that then comes down to the two major operating systems that are in use today, Android and iOS. So the next thing is to look at Workspace. So originally mobile devices started out with single function devices. These were very simple, very nice little devices that did one thing and one thing well, whether that be a messaging device like a pager or a voice communication device like an really old-fashioned flip phone. The world sort of evolved from there, from being these single function devices, into a single application device. And a BlackBerry is a good example of that. It's one device, it runs one main application. That application has a number of features. It has email, it has voice, it has contacts, it has calendar. And that's what you live in. It's a single device. The vast majority of all of the software you ever use on it is the software that came with it the first time. And it's pretty much functional. Now, as time goes on, we're now migrating from that single application device onto a modern what we call a smartphone today, whether that be iOS or Android. And there, instead of having this one big app, we have a collection of little apps. You know, even just in simple things, we have a mail app, which is separate than the calendar app, which is separate than the contacts app. And you can swap it. If you don't like the default calendar app, you can go and find a different one. So now we're taking it from this single application to having a whole set of applications that communicate together to create the user experience on the mobile device. And that's what we're calling a workspace. And so we're focusing very much on how do we deploy and manage these groups of applications in a secure fashion. So to start off with, let's take a look at management. So from a management point of view, what do we want to do with these devices? We have all of these devices, whether they're corporate owned or personal owned, that are out in people's hands. And what are the things that we need to be able to do with them? We need to be able to install, update, disable, wipe, both the applications and their corresponding data that comes along with it. And that's both the initial provisioning and as well as incremental updates and rollouts of functionality without having to pull back and have physical access on the devices. We need to be able to have dynamically configurable policies. We all know that, we start out with an assumption that a 4-digit PIN code is secure. Someone comes out and proves that 4 digits isn't enough, and we need to be able to increase the policy to 20 digits. But we want to be able to do that without having to go back and, pull in all the devices or re-update things. So we need to be able to push out policies independent of pushing out applications and data. And also, what we want to do is we want to be able to enforce security best practices. So if I have an application that's written by the Global Support Services Group, they know all about applications and how to handle tickets and how to handle customer escalations, and that's what they do. But they're not an expert in how do I securely store data on a handset, how do I do secure networking, how do I put PIN codes and access policies on it, how do I communicate back to management servers. So what we need to be able to do is have a solution where we can take applications that already exist from groups that have written them to be able to do one thing and one thing well, and then apply around the outside of it the policies that we require without requiring these applications to be rewritten or modified. So let's look at security. So security means many things to many people, but really it breaks down into 3 main areas: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is what we run into at all times in corporate life in North America, where we're trying to restrict who can see information, who can access it. Integrity is all about can someone change the data, and then therefore by changing the data, impact the behavior of people. If you get an email that is spoofed saying you've been fired, it looks like it's from your boss, but someone spoofed it, that's going to cause a little bit of hassles and a little bit of angst. So we need to be able to ensure integrity of the data that is cached and operated on the mobile device. And then lastly, the final part about security is availability, making sure that the data and applications are always available for access. Now, this last one is a little bit hard. The first two, in confidentiality and integrity, you can apply modern techniques such as encryption and so on to fix. But availability is very hard to solve on a mobile device. It's very easy for the user just to let their phone battery go flat. We all do it. Well, there. So it's hard from a software perspective to do a lot about it. So we focus on protecting confidentiality and availability and integrity over availability. So finally, let's look at what market are we in security. Security is not black and white. It's a constant gray area. So at one end, you have the people who like my 15-year-old son, who basically publishes his life quite happily on Twitter. But on the far other end of the spectrum, you have the spooks that live down in Washington, D.C., that walk around with lead tents and armed guards. Now, neither of us are going to be at that extreme, and in the commercial world, we're somewhere in the middle. And there's various different techniques for implementing security for each of these, whether you go from the very weak side, which is, things like lazy isolation. So today, you can sign in. A lot of companies will allow you to sign in with Active Sync email onto your personal phone, as long as you give up the ability to not have a PIN code and to wipe the device. But there's no real isolation to prevent you from copying data around. It's ease of use over things. You can go to the model such as good technologies, where you're creating a bubble which you live in. And this is somewhat similar to creating a sort of a virtual physical device. You can keep going up a little bit further, and you can say, well, I want to do a hosted hypervisor, where a hypervisor in a virtual machine gives you a nice clear boundary that you can say, does information cross one way or the other? And then if you want to go up into the further cases, you can do things like a bare metal hypervisor, where both the secure and insecure portions are both running in two separated environments from the hardware, just like we have with the ESX today. But in the mobile world, this is not very practical, because unlike the PC world, where hardware and server hardware changes in generations that are measured in years, the mobile hardware changes in generations that are measured as months. So if we do all the work in order to port a bare metal hypervisor to a particular handset, well, since the handset is only on market for 6 months before the next version comes out, it really doesn't give you a lot of engineering time to do much. and hence looking at hosted solutions. And then finally, at the very high end, you have mechanical isolation, where someone just takes two phones, puts a bit of copper in between it, and glues them together. And that's today what a lot of the high-end government use cases are. So the important thing to remember is that security is not black and white. And with the Horizon Mobile products, we're focusing on the gray area where we see it as the corporate use case. So this is from an average general corporation up through finance and medicine, and quite possibly in the future, approaching things up in the low end of the government space. The other thing to remember is that security is a journey, not a destination. You're never secure, because all it takes is for someone to discover a new vulnerability, which you need to be able to react to. So it's very important in any system that the secure system, to focus on not just making it secure, but also how do you keep it secure in the long run. But given that we're trying to secure a mobile device, we have to remember that no matter virtualization or software is going to protect against the purchase key attack, where someone just walks up and offers a duffel bag of cash for a bit of information, or the good old rubber hose attack, where someone walks up with a rubber hose and hits the person over the head and says, "Tell me what I want to know." So we have some certain boundaries as to how far we can take the security of mobile devices. So now let's take a little bit of a look at the Android product that we have in market today. So if you look at it from a block diagram point of view, the easiest way to describe it is basically VMware Workstation for Android plus a management agent. So on one side of the diagram here, we have a conventional virtual machine guest. You have a virtual machine monitor that creates the virtual CPU, a kernel, the second kernel that's running within that virtual machine, and the Android and various applications and middleware that's running on top of that kernel. Back on the host side, we have two components which make up the virtual machine. The user interface proxy, the application that gives you the input and the screen output from the virtual machine, and the virtual machine support services, the back end for all of the device drivers and everything else. So for example, if an application wants to know, where's my current position, it opens up a GPS driver, and that message gets sent across to the virtual machine support services, which then go and ask the appropriate API on the host to say, where am I? The final piece in the host side is, of course, our management agent that we need in order to be able to remotely manage the contents of the virtual machine and the policies that are applied to it. On Android, in order to achieve good performance and security with the virtual machine, we have this little tiny kernel module, which is labeled up here as MVPKM, which gives us the performance and the security that we need to be able to keep the Android solution. There's really two parts to that kernel module. One part is to do with actually increasing the performance of the virtualization and to make it to near Unity performance. And the second piece is basically to watch over the platform itself. And so that if the host platform on Android gets rooted, it's not very hard to do on Android, but if we root it, we turn around and we kill the virtual machine and all the contents along with it. So we're protecting confidentiality and integrity over availability in this case. So if we now look at it and let's try and dive down one more layer into it from a security perspective. So we have a number of attack surfaces around the outside of this workspace which we've created. The first attack surface is the one that we always very common with as end users, which is the user interface. So that basically consists of the display, making sure that you display data from the virtual machine across to the user's screen without the ability to tamper with it. We have, and for the ability to unlock the screen so that you can hide it from people who aren't authorized. HID, on Android, you can have what's called an input method. So it's very easy to write a little downloadable application that will log every keystroke. So we have to go and we have to do some special things to make sure that we don't allow any applications running on the host to be able to intercept or log the keys that are going through to the guest. And the same with audio. You don't want to be able to impersonate things going on in the guest just because you're coming in from the host. The next sort of layer of data that we have to look at from the workspace is the data at rest. So your applications are going to generate and cache small amounts of data that have come in from the network, and we want to make sure that they remain on the device. On Android, there are two storage mediums that we have to worry about. The first storage medium is the internal flash, which is relatively secure itself, but of course you can root the device and to be able to access it. And that's where we basically have to sit and watch over it, see the attempt to root it, and then be able to delete the encryption keys as fast as possible such that the data at rest internally cannot be accessed. Because the internal storage on an Android device is relatively limited on a lot of devices, they tend to have a large SD card. So when we look at it from a virtual machine point of view, we have to store our VMDK image somewhere. So it makes sense to be able to store it onto the SD card on certain phones. And when we store it there, we basically want to be able to do disk encryption. So we basically implement the standard AES XDS, which is the same disk encryption that's used on your Macintosh or your Windows PC when you enable full disk encryption. The next sort of surface level is data in use, so data when we're actually running. So the first piece is access to DRAM. So can a program running on the host, a user program, access the guest? And here with today's hardware on the ARM architecture, we just have to rely upon the protections that you would get in a normal operating system between the kernel and pieces. In the future, ARM, just like the x86 world, has moved and added in extensions for hardware virtualization. So when these come to market, which will hopefully be in the first chips will be appearing in the phones in 2013, we'll be able to actually start using hardware mechanisms to enforce the access control over DRAM, not just software. The next levels, as we have to look at it, is where are all the intercommunication between things. So things like cut, copy, paste, the IPC between applications, you're opening in things, and things like content providers where you have a common contacts database that lots of applications can access on Android. Now, these mechanisms are very easy to sort of protect because we're all running within this virtual machine. So by default, there's no way for these IPC mechanisms to leave the actual device. Now, in certain use cases, especially if you take this product and you look at it from a European perspective, which tends to be much more focused on privacy rather than confidentiality, in Europe, a lot of people want to be able to separate out the work environment, but they don't care if the work data leaks into the home data, as long as home data doesn't leak into the work environment. And therefore, what we can do is we can do things like, cut, copy, paste in one direction, or you can access a read-only copy of your work contacts from your home environment, but not the other way around. And then finally, we have data in motion. It's not very much use to have just a sandbox running on a device if it cannot communicate back to the corporate network where all of the useful information is originating from. And for this on Android, we basically reuse the existing VPN clients on the platform. So that it's just your standard Cisco and Juniper and F5 clients that you would download off Google Play. We can do some magic underneath the hood, and so that when you fire it up, instead of the VPN client applying to all applications running on the device, we can start the client in a mode where the client only VPNs in just the applications running in the guest. So that the guest, if the VPN client is not up, it has no networking, and when the client is active, all the networking traffic goes back to the enterprise, where it can then be filtered, logged, and a decision can be made as to whether it goes into the internal network or back out to the internet. So that's really, I think, a little bit of a look at where we are with our Android product today. So now let's look at iOS. iOS, because of the certain Apple limitations, is a very different product. So what we've done is we've taken from the VMware technology portfolio, just like the Android product was basically VMware Workstation for Android. What we've here is we've taken a look and we said we have a product called VMware Thin App, where we take an existing Windows app and we wrap it around it. Now, normally you use Thin App for compatibility reasons, so you can run Internet Explorer 6 on Windows 7, for example, but you can also use this same interception of APIs to add policy to the application. And that's exactly what we do here on iOS. We take an existing application, an IPA file that our internal developers have written, or our third parties, and we basically be able to intercept all of the API calls that application makes between the application itself and the system. And then we can apply policy at that level, whether it be things like making sure that, every time you read or write from storage, that it's suitably protected with the right permission flags and encryption flags. Whether the cut, copy, paste, instead of making it available to the whole world when you just cut, copy, paste it into a buffer, well, we can take it, we can encrypt it, we can put it in a private buffer such that only other applications within the workspace have the encryption keys to be able to then copy it out and decrypt it out of the cut, copy, paste buffer. So overall summary, it's just really thin app for iOS, plus, of course, a remote management agent, because we can't forget where we started here, which is to be able to remotely manage this workspace, to be able to install, update, configure policies, and so on dynamically. So let's now take the same look that we looked at and said, where are we on the security story for this product? So from the user interface point of view, from the display, we can do the same things. We can make sure that the pixels get to the screen in a secure fashion. We can make sure that access to the screen and to the keyboard is controlled with a PIN. And because iOS is a much more secure platform, we don't have some of the issues that we have to worry about with Android around key logging and so on, although there's still some minor issues that we look at. And then we have the same things with audio input and output. Data at rest, this is slightly different on iOS, primarily because Apple doesn't support removable media, which simplifies that piece. But Apple does have things such as iTunes, where you can just plug your USB cable in and neatly back up or snarf off all of the content onto your device, or via the new Cloud Sync mechanism. So for the disk encryption and things, we just make sure that everything on the device is securely encrypted, and that all the permission flags are all set such that that encrypted data can never leave the device via either iTunes or the backup. For data in use, we're running on iOS, and the iOS kernel does a pretty good job of keeping a secure sandbox between applications. So although it's not hardware separated, it's a pretty good job, and I think probably better overall than Android's Linux kernel for the DRAM protection. Things like cut, copy, paste is what I discussed earlier, where we have to intercept these sharing APIs, the very few of them that Android have, the open-in and the cut, copy, paste, and make sure that before the data leaves that application, it's encrypted, put into the common area that the Apple iOS maintains, and then when the application at the other side pulls it out, then it's decrypted again and off it goes. So we can basically perform secure IPC between the applications, even though only one application is ever running at the time on iOS. And then finally, the last piece is data in motion. So once again, we need to be able to have the applications that we match inside the workspace securely access back to the corporate enterprise, but not allow the rest of the applications on the system to do so. Because we don't have the same level of system access that we do on iOS, we can't use a conventional IPsec layer 2 VPN. And instead, what we do is a much higher level proxy, which can be basically described as, an SSL VPN or a secure HTTP proxy, where we intercept every outgoing connection from the application, tunnel it back to the edge of the enterprise, and off we go. The piece to remember that with this app tunnel is that because we're tunneling it back to the edge, we've taken an approach where we basically are trusting the device. So that means that the user itself, from a user experience point of view, will just go, they'll fire up their application that wants to access the thing, the global support network, my bug tracking application. I'll enter the PIN code to authenticate myself to the workspace, and then at that point I will use a certificate-based device pairing to be able to get myself back to the edge of the corporate network, where then I can be filtered and off I go. When we're doing this on Android with a normal VPN client, of course, if we follow the same security policies that some enterprises have in place for desktop VPN, for example, an RSA two-factor authentication every 4 hours, that becomes very painful to use on a mobile device. So we sort of have to work with the corporate security people to say, well, this is a mobile device, let's prefer a little bit more usability over necessarily security, and maybe let's do a certificate enrollment. So we use certificate-based authentication to achieve that connection back to the network. And I think that's about all for the quick overview. So questions, anyone? There's 2 microphones as usual.
One quick one. How does it handle AD changes, like password changes on the user side? How's the application access, refresh the password for like the Outlook and such, for the mail client?
Okay, so the question is what's the authentication model, and how do we handle changes in authentication such as AD password refreshes and so on? So the model basically that we're creating with this workspace is that there's really 3 separate authentications that go on. The first authentication is between the device and the management console, or the edge of the network. And that is a certificate-based authentication that is created with a SCEP initialization when you initially install the management client on the app. And at that point, it's just a device binding. For the initial enrollment, of course, in order to be able to get as far as the SCEP, is going to rely upon just Active Directory credentials, but that's just used purely for the enrollment. Once you've created the workspace, at that point you have a local PIN code password that's applied to the workspace, but that's purely just local, and that's the PIN code password policy that you'd have. And that needs to be separate from any sort of network policy or AD, because you'll have quite a different balance between usability versus things. So if you have a very complex, 20-character passwords are required with uppercase and lowercase and symbols for your AD passwords, you probably don't want that for your PIN code that you use to unlock frequently used applications. So that's a separate one. And then, of course, you have the third level of authentication, which is what applications themselves use internally. If I have my bug tracking app or something and it has to authenticate back to Bugzilla or Jira on the back end, and that we don't do anything with today. That's just left over. In the Horizon Suite coming out in the future, the Horizon Suite provides an OAuth SAML mechanism to be able to basically provide a single sign-on for applications that have been written to use the OAuth piece. Okay.
Hi. I was wondering, since there's an emphasis on initially providing, kind of main office functions, so like email, for example, are you guys going to be providing applications for attaching to your corporate email service, or are you going to rely on third party to provide those? And then if you are providing them, how do you plan on connecting back to major email services?
So on the Android platform, we sort of did a survey of all the available Android email clients and didn't come up with any that sort of we felt were usable on an enterprise basis. So we've got our own email client that we bundle along with the thing. It comes with calendaring and contacts. And so that's a VMware thing. On the iOS side of the platform, well, everyone sort of relies upon the Apple Mail client, so it's very hard to find third-party mail clients that are very good, but it looks like we'll probably be partnering with someone to achieve that, or a combination of in-house and external. But all of these clients just talk the standard active sync protocol back to whatever server, whether you want to have them talk to an external server, or whether you want to rely upon the tunneling, the VPN, to be able to allow them to talk to ActiveSync internally without a gateway on the outside.
And then just to add one more thing, in addition to email, contacts, calendar, and browser and stuff like that, our vision is to put other interesting apps in the workspace, just out of the box, so we don't nickel and dime you guys, right? So for example, Horizon Data, which is our Octopus file sync thing, right? We know every one of you guys will carry multiple devices. You want your synced data across devices. So that's going to be bundled into the workspace, so you don't have to go get it separately, right? And we're talking about, hey, does SocialCast make sense? What other applications do we just bundle and create a very compelling workspace out of the box? And if you want to put other apps, certainly you can do that.
With regards to iOS packages or apps. What's the packaging process look like for that? You said it was an IPA, so are we going to rely on you to give us all the available IPAs, or can we download them and then repackage them to deliver securely? And what's the licensing like on that?
So when in Rome, you have to do as the Romans do, and Apple basically have come up with 3 distribution mechanisms that allow you to distribute apps in the Apple ecosystem. And they're, of course, the public app store, which everyone knows about. There's a B2B store, which is basically the same thing. You submit your application to Apple, and they approve it. And then instead of publishing it on the global catalog, it's sort of a private catalog that you have to opt in to be able to see. And then the third method they give is in-house distribution, where if you're writing applications just purely for your own employees, you can write applications and distribute them out. So the primary mechanism that we use is that in-house distribution, because that's very simple. You just have the global support people. They can write their app using the standard Xcode tools. They grab the IPA file, you upload the IPA, and we automatically wrap it as it is downloaded to the handset. So it's all completely transparent from that. When we're working with third parties, okay, then the Apple license agreement says, well, we have to go through the App Store. So in that case, we sort of have to pass the wrapping code off to the third party, the app is wrapped, and then published normally through the B2B store. But yes, it's a little bit of a hassle, and hopefully Apple will improve things as time goes on.
I wouldn't bet money on it.
I had 2 questions during the Android demo. What were you doing as the user to switch between the guest and the host? And is the notification bar shared between them?
So the question is what's the sort of the Unity user experience that you end up with between the 2 environments? So the first thing to remember is that Android applications and iOS applications are full screen by default. So the common way that you switch between applications is either by clicking on an icon on the launcher, which is the first way to switch between the work and the home, is you can find the switch icon and click on it, and if you're in the work environment, you find the corresponding switch icon and switch back again. The second way that you interact with applications is via the notifications. So on Android, we basically have a unified notification bar at the top, which has both notifications from the home side and the work side. And when you click on the appropriate one, it will take you to the appropriate application in the appropriate side, and then you have to enter your PIN code as appropriate if you haven't entered it recently enough. So for example, in the demo, when I clicked on the calendar entry in the thing, it just did a switch into the virtual machine. I didn't have to enter my PIN code in that case because I'd already entered it recently, but normally you would have to do that, and then it would fire up the calendar application at the right place in the guest. So it's completely sort of transparent to the user. So in most use cases, if you're just navigating via the top notifications, you don't even know really that there's 2 VMs in place.
So I guess I'll apologize because it's been a long week. I should already have gotten this out of this, but we use Mobile Iron to distribute apps. Using an Apple certificate, we write some custom apps, and I guess I didn't get out of what I seen in the demo where that capability would exist to be able to put that into that environment.
I can take that. Yeah. So I mean, we didn't get to show you the management interface. If you guys want to stick around after, I can show you that. But there's a management interface, and one of the key features of the management interface is an enterprise app store, right? And so the notion would be, whether it's an iOS app or an Android app, you would upload it into your enterprise app store first. And roughly speaking, you would do a right click and say, hey, provision this app into the sales group or marketing group or engineering group. We'll take that app, push it over there, install it into either the iOS workspace or the Android workspace, depending on what kind of an app it is. So that enterprise app store and the ability to push apps onto devices is built into the management interface.
Thanks.
Just a security question. You mentioned the data at rest is encrypted, right? Where is that key is kept? How you manage that key?
So on Android, unfortunately, you don't normally have access to the hardware security layers underneath it to be able to store the key really securely. They're normally controlled by the operator, as in the SIM card, or the payment system as in the NFC secure element. So the approach on Android is that we store the keys internally, and we have a little daemon that's part of the kernel to be able to basically watch over it. So if we ever sense that anything is at all wrong, any of the standard security mechanisms within Android have been breached, we then just wipe the key. So it's sort of a reactive approach on Android to being able to protect that. On iOS, of course, it's a little bit of a harder story to deal with, but we're trying to hook into the Apple secure hardware chain, because that's really the only chain that you have on iOS where you can protect the key and hence be able to make it encryption actually secure rather than just obfuscation. Because of course, if your key is in plain sight, well, encryption's not too much use.
Other questions, guys? Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone.
And we'll be around if you guys have other questions.